Have you ever noticed how the person who ran from you, dodged you, or shut down emotionally somehow finds their way back? Not because you chased them, but because something about you makes you unforgettable. Today, we're talking about why avoidants always return to the super empath and why their return is never about luck, but about power. There's a moment many people face. The avoidant partner suddenly pulls away. They get distant, cold, maybe even disappear. And the super empath, the person who feels deeply, loves deeply, and understands deeply, starts wondering, was I too much? Did I scare them off? Did my love overwhelm them? But here's the truth. Avoidants don't run because you were too much. They run because your emotional clarity exposes how little they're giving. The super empath doesn't just love, they understand. They see people at their core, past their defenses, past the bravado, past the performative independence, and nothing terrifies an avoidant more than being seen. Not judged, seen. But here's where the story flips, because the very thing that scares them is the same thing that brings them back. Avoidants return to the super empath, not out of convenience, but out of contrast. When someone who knows their own worth, communicates with sincerity, sets gentle but firm boundaries, and doesn't beg for affection steps away, the avoidant feels the difference. They feel the absence of emotional safety. They feel the absence of genuine connection. They feel the absence of being understood without needing to perform. Super empaths don't chase, they invite. And when the avoidant realizes that they've lost the one person who made emotional intimacy feel possible without pressure, they circle back. But the important shift is this: the super empath doesn't wait at the door. They evolve, they heal, they grow. They learn to channel their emotional depth into people who can meet it. And when the avoidant returns, and they almost always do, they're not returning to the same person they left. They're returning to someone stronger, clearer, and no longer willing to shrink themselves just to make someone else feel comfortable. The irresistible force is not desperation. It's not longing. It's not emotional availability without boundaries. It's confidence mixed with compassion. It's empathy without self-abandonment. It's love that doesn't require losing yourself. Avoidants return to the super empath because that combination is rare. And once they feel it, every shallow connection afterward feels like an imitation. But the super empath's power isn't that they can make someone return. It's that they can decide when they do whether the door is still open. Avoidants don't distance themselves because the super empath is too intense, too emotional, or too expressive. They distance themselves because being with someone emotionally attuned highlights the very parts of themselves they aren't ready to face. When an avoidant encounters a super empath, they're suddenly meeting someone who can read emotional shifts without needing them explained, someone who listens between the lines, someone who senses discomfort before it becomes conflict. That level of awareness feels safe on one hand, but on the other, it exposes the avoidant's emotional blind spots. It shines a light on their unhealed wounds, their need to maintain control, and their habit of protecting themselves by withdrawing instead of connecting. The avoidant isn't running from the empath's love. They're running from the responsibility that real emotional intimacy requires. The super empath makes it clear through their words, presence, and emotional intelligence what a healthy connection looks like. They communicate openly, they show care without suffocating, and they validate feelings without trying to fix or manipulate. This should be attractive, and often it is, but it also triggers a fear response in the avoidant because it demands authenticity. It demands reciprocity. It demands vulnerability. And those are muscles the avoidant has underdeveloped, sometimes their entire life. To someone who has built their identity around not needing anyone, it's destabilizing to meet a person who can see past the facade. The avoidant's distancing isn't a commentary on the super empath's worth. It's a defense mechanism. They fear being seen as inadequate, fear disappointing someone who clearly shows up with emotional skill, fear being required to match that level of presence. The relationship becomes a mirror that reflects the avoidant's emotional avoidance, their inability to sit with discomfort, and the ways they withhold closeness to feel safe. It's far easier for them to convince themselves that the connection is overwhelming than to admit that what overwhelms them is their own vulnerability. The irony is that the avoidant often admires the very qualities they run from. They notice the empath's ability to communicate calmly, to care without control, to love without clinging. They appreciate how the super empath creates emotional safety, something the avoidant has rarely experienced. But admiration turns into anxiety when they feel unprepared to reciprocate. Instead of rising to meet the emotional depth offered, they retreat to familiar patterns, pulling away, minimizing feelings, or mentally exiting even while physically present. So when an avoidant withdraws, it's not the empath being too much. It's the avoidant feeling not enough. And that internal tension, not the empath's nature, is what sends them running. The emotional depth and clarity of a super empath create a kind of intimacy that an avoidant both longs for and feels deeply unprepared to handle. When the super empath connects with someone, they do it with a genuine curiosity about the other person's inner world. They're present, they listen, and they respond in ways that make the other person feel seen in a way they may have never experienced before. This kind of connection isn't loud or dramatic. It's steady, consistent, and sincere. It allows the other person to drop their guard without even realizing it, because the empath isn't trying to control the moment. They're simply meeting it with openness. Avoidants crave that openness on a subconscious level. They may spend years convincing themselves that they don't need deep emotional closeness, yet when they encounter someone who offers it in a healthy, grounded way, something inside them softens. They start to feel understood without having to explain themselves fully. They feel emotionally recognized even in the spaces where they normally hide. It's a rare kind of attunement, and to the avoidant, it can feel like finally being met in a language they never learned how to speak but always wished someone understood. But this intimacy also creates tension. The super empath naturally encourages emotional honesty, not by demanding it, but by modeling it. Their clarity when communicating feelings sets a tone that is almost impossible to ignore. They don't weaponize vulnerability, they simply express it. They don't play games, they speak truthfully. They don't feed insecurity, they soothe it through understanding. This combination is powerful because it invites the avoidant into a level of closeness they aren't accustomed to. It challenges the avoidant to show up in ways they've never practiced, ways that feel risky. For someone with avoidant tendencies, emotional closeness equals emotional danger. Their instinct is to protect themselves by retreating, minimizing feelings, or delaying connection. But the super empath's presence disrupts that pattern. Their calm, intentional, emotional expression makes it harder for the avoidant to hide behind distance. They begin to feel the pull of wanting to be close, even though closeness has always been threatening. It's like standing near a warm fire, comforting, but also too intense if you're not used to it. The avoidant senses that the super empath offers a level of connection they cannot easily replicate elsewhere. The empath's emotional depth creates a safe container where the avoidant can feel without being judged. Their clarity helps the avoidant understand their own emotions better, sometimes for the first time. And even though this depth may scare them enough to run, it's also what draws them back. The connection feels genuine, grounding, and uniquely comforting in a way that stays with them long after they pull away. When the super empath steps back or creates distance, the avoidant experiences a type of absence they rarely encounter elsewhere. For most of their lives, avoidants have built protective walls to shield themselves from emotional intensity. They've learned to manage relationships by controlling distance, keeping conversations superficial, or retreating at the first sign of vulnerability. In other words, they're used to emotional gaps they themselves engineer. But when the super empath withdraws, the void feels different. It's not manufactured, it's real. It's not an excuse for freedom, it's a reflection of a connection that could have been, and that difference is striking. The avoidant feels the absence in ways that surprise them. Suddenly, there's no one providing that quiet, steady validation, no one offering understanding without judgment, no one who anticipates what they need emotionally before they even ask. The very safety they once feared now becomes something they crave. The absence of the super empath reveals just how rare true emotional availability is and how shallow or unfulfilling most other interactions feel in comparison. It's a subtle, almost imperceptible tug at first, a feeling that something is missing, but it grows stronger the longer the empath is absent. This gap forces the avoidant to confront emotions they've spent a lifetime dodging. Loneliness no longer comes from being physically alone. It comes from lacking authentic emotional resonance. They notice how conversations with others feel surface level, how interactions with people who cannot mirror or understand them leave them feeling empty. They recognize, often unconsciously, that the emotional connection they had with the super empath was not just comforting, it was transformational. It created a space where they could be themselves without fear of judgment, a space that gave them room to feel safely, and that realization unsettles them because it's something they cannot easily replicate. The absence also triggers reflection. Without the empath's presence as a constant mirror, avoidants start to see the patterns in their own behavior more clearly, the walls they've built, the distances they've maintained, the ways they've avoided real connection. And while this can be uncomfortable, it also creates a magnetic pull. The very qualities they feared and resisted, emotional depth, clarity, empathy, become what they miss the most. In other words, the lack of the super empath doesn't just highlight what the avoidant can't handle, it illuminates what they secretly long for. In essence, when the super empath withdraws, it forces the avoidant to confront the contrast between superficial connections and the rare, meaningful connection they once had. The absence makes them feel the unique emotional safety and understanding they took for granted, creating a subtle but irresistible gravitational pull back toward the person who once made intimacy feel possible without pressure or judgment. When avoidants return, it's rarely to the same person they left behind. While they may expect to find the same vulnerability and openness, the super empath has been moving forward during their absence, growing in self-awareness, confidence, and emotional resilience. This evolution doesn't happen overnight. It's a process of reflection, healing, and refinement. The empath has learned to set clearer boundaries, recognize patterns that don't serve them, and protect their energy without guilt. They no longer shrink themselves to accommodate someone else's fear or emotional unavailability. The very qualities that once made them so approachable to the avoidant, compassion, empathy, and patience, remain, but they are now coupled with discernment and a stronger sense of self-worth. This growth changes the dynamic entirely. The avoidant may return expecting to slip back into familiar patterns, but the super empath is no longer someone who tolerates avoidance or chases after affection. They have learned to recognize the difference between someone who truly wants to engage and someone who only dips in when convenient. Their emotional clarity now serves as both a compass and a boundary. They can identify when an avoidant is showing up authentically or merely seeking comfort without commitment. This makes the return of the avoidant more complicated because the empath's energy is no longer easily absorbed or manipulated. In addition, the super empath has often developed a stronger connection to themselves. They have spent time reflecting on their own needs, desires, and limits, and they understand that their worth is not contingent on someone else's emotional availability. They've learned to prioritize their own emotional health and cultivate relationships that are reciprocal, not one-sided. This growth creates a magnetic presence. The avoidant senses the difference immediately. The person they left behind is now someone with both depth and boundaries, someone who can love without losing themselves, someone who radiates calm confidence and emotional steadiness. This evolution also alters the power dynamic. Before, the avoidant may have felt in control simply by pulling away, using distance as leverage. But the super empath's growth diminishes that leverage. The avoidant can no longer manipulate emotions or elicit guilt to create closeness. Instead, they encounter someone who understands the value of their own energy and will not settle for anything less than genuine engagement. This forces the avoidant to approach with authenticity if they wish to reconnect meaningfully rather than relying on old patterns of avoidance or emotional games. Ultimately, the return of the avoidant is met with a super empath who has transformed into a version of themselves that is stronger, clearer, and fully aware of what they will and will not accept. The dynamic shifts from one of pursuit and retreat to one of measured choice, emotional clarity, and empowered presence, fundamentally changing the relationship and how the avoidant must engage. The true power of the super empath lies not in drawing the avoidant back, but in their ability to hold the space of choice and self-respect. They understand that their value is not defined by someone else's neediness or inconsistency, and that love is not measured by who returns or who chases. This perspective gives them a rare clarity. They're not desperate for attention, they are not pleading for validation, and they are not bargaining for affection. Instead, they operate from a place of conscious presence. They know what they bring to a relationship, and they know the difference between someone who genuinely wants to meet them and someone who only returns when it's convenient or emotionally safe for them. By prioritizing their own boundaries, the super empath shifts the dynamic entirely. Avoidants, who have historically relied on distance as a way to control intimacy, suddenly encounter someone who cannot be easily manipulated or hurried. The empath's calm and grounded presence creates a sense of stability that contrasts sharply with the avoidant's patterns of inconsistency. This contrast is magnetic because it awakens the avoidant's subconscious recognition of what real connection feels like, a connection that does not compromise their partner's integrity, but also requires them to rise to a new level of emotional accountability. The power of choice also allows the super empath to communicate desire without neediness. They can engage, care, and love without losing themselves in the process. They do not chase the avoidant, nor do they act from fear of losing them. Instead, they present themselves fully, with warmth and empathy, yet with a quiet strength that says, I am available to you, but I am complete on my own. This combination is rare, and it is precisely what creates the gravitational pull that draws avoidance back. It's not coercion or manipulation. It's the magnetic resonance of someone who has mastered their own emotional world. When the avoidant returns, they are met not with a person waiting desperately for them, but with someone who has moved forward and grown during their absence. This changes the energy entirely. The avoidant is forced to confront their own inconsistencies, to reflect on the reasons they left, and to approach with authenticity if they hope to reconnect. The super empath's boundaries are not walls, they are measures of self-respect. They signal that love is never about compromise at the cost of one's own emotional health. Ultimately, the super empath's power is the freedom to decide. They are the gatekeepers of their own emotional world. Whether they open the door or leave it closed, they do so with full awareness of their worth. This sovereignty transforms the relationship from one of pursuit and escape into one of conscious choice, ensuring that any return from the avoidant is met on terms that honor both parties and preserve the empath's integrity. And so, the story of the avoidant and the super empath isn't about chasing or clinging. It's about presence, clarity, and self-respect. It's about understanding that love doesn't mean losing yourself to someone else's fear, and that real connection is magnetic precisely because it comes from a place of confidence, compassion, and emotional authenticity. The avoidant may return, they may hesitate, and they may test the boundaries, but the super empath has already moved forward, grown stronger, and now holds the power to choose what kind of love they will accept. Thank you for giving your attention and energy to this conversation today. I hope you walk away feeling empowered, seen, and reminded that your emotional depth is not a liability. It's your strength. May you honor it, protect it, and share it with those who are truly capable of meeting it. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart for being here and engaging with this important topic. Take care of yourselves, embrace your growth, and continue being the kind of force that cannot be ignored.